we endeavor to take on in our practice of taking specific time, taking effort to focus ourselves, sitting here with attention, breathing in, breathing out, opening our hearts so that the eyes of our heart may be opened to see where that love abides. Otherwise, if we do not take such measures, we will always be preoccupied with this little self, this little I, me mind that wakes up in the morning and thinks, okay, what'll I have for breakfast, or what'll I do today? What'll I. So our day-to-day life is always centered on this little I, and that becomes for us the center of the universe. And it is a life that is centered on that little I that causes all the suffering in the world. I won't go into detail into the implications of that, but I'm sure you know what I mean. If each and every one of us only looked out for this little I, then, as so much of what's happening in the world today is all about, then it's conflict, and it's animosity, and it's greed and ill will based on our ignorance that truly we are created, or rather we are here precisely indebted to one another for this interconnected web of life that brings us to, that brought us here. And our task in life is to allow that unconditional love that brought us out of nothingness into being to precisely be embodied in this life of ours, so that Zen is finding love everywhere in all things. Means it's the search for that love that will make my life truly find peace, the peace that I'm longing for, and it will also allow me to find my sense of groundedness in the universe, and it will allow me to see everything and everyone around me as not separate from me, as one with me, as my kin. So now, how does Zen help us find that? Well, those of you who have sat a little bit may be able to recount that in your own experience, somehow your eyes come to be opened to realize that in little moments when you feel that sense of connectedness, when you feel not separate. And I encourage you to continue sitting so that more of those moments will come. And there may be a definitive moment when you see precisely that little I that I construct my world around, or rather around which I construct what I think is my world, is really a construct and a delusion. And it is seeing through that delusion that allows, that the Zen effects in us. And in seeing through that delusion of that little I, then we see things for what they are. So what are things for what they are? I would like to take an example of a Zen master that I really hold dear in my heart, whom I cherish and respect, who passed away a few years ago. I met him in a Zen teachers meeting, well, in several Zen teachers meeting, and there will be an initial day or initial afternoon where the men teachers get together and then the women teachers get together to discuss gender specific issues in Zen. And then after that, the next day we all go together and join. And so in these gender specific meetings, especially when the men could really be able to open their hearts to one another, we could really get a sense of a kinship with one another. Of course, that also went with the more gender mixed groups, but here I met Myogen Steve Stuckey, who was an abbot of San Francisco Zen Center. And I remember him fondly as I recall the kinds of things that we did together with a small group. But recently I came across an interview he had with a person who is writing about Zen in our contemporary world, Rick McDaniels, who wrote several volumes detailing the different ways in which Zen has come to manifest itself in the Western Hemisphere, especially in North America. And so in this interview with Steve Stuckey, he notes what Steve said that I'd like to share with everyone to support what I had been referring to as our pointer for this weekend. Steve is now at a point where he's been diagnosed with cancer. And so, aware of this cancer, then he is responding to an interview. And so he gives an answer to one of the questions. He says, "The entire earth is the true human body." That's from Dogen, Zen Master Dogen of the 13th century. The entire earth is a true human body. So each human body is also independent and simultaneously the entire earth. Ponder that, sit with that. Each human body is also independent. You are an independent human body manifesting the entire earth. And sometimes you may really see that when you let go of your particular attachment to some small identity and realize that the tree is as much a part of me as my shoulder. The sky is much a part of me as my eyelashes. The sound of the ocean is as much a part of me as the sound of my own breathing. To actually experience it that way is something that shows up in our practice. Steve goes on to say, I think it's not so unusual, particularly for people who are doing this practice of sitting. I am very grateful to have this practice. It sustains me and will continue to sustain me to the last moment of my conscious life. So that is Steve Myogen Stuckey responding to a question about how his Zen practice makes a difference in his life. Now, Steve was asked further by the interviewer about what he does in his daily practice to cultivate this sense of feeling, experiencing the earth as his own body, and to experience everything and everyone as part of his own body. And so this is how he responds. For some years, I've been doing a practice of waking up with gratitude. First thing, sitting up at the edge of the bed and putting my hands together and just saying the word gratitude. And then it's an open question. For what? And whatever comes up in my experience is that for which I am, I'd say, grateful to have this meeting. Whatever it is, who I am, and whatever it is supporting me in this life, it's completely beyond judgment or preference. So lately, I've been grateful to have that practice. So this is Steve Stuckey Roshi discussing or sharing little vignettes of his own Zen practice. So taking that into our consideration, I would like to make that suggestion for each and every one of us in our own day-to-day practice. As we get up in the morning, take a posture that will convey that gratitude. It could be either putting your hands together like that while you're still sitting in bed, or you may kneel down beside your bed if you wish. For me, myself, it is putting my arms outstretched in this way and then taking a deep breath once, twice, and 3 times. And I utter a silent prayer and a silent invocation and a silent expression of gratitude. That is something I'd like to offer as a recommendation for each and every one of us to really enable us to live each day beginning with that sense of being grateful. So maybe sometime after this, when we meet in Doksan, I'll ask you whether you've taken up this suggestion or not. But don't worry about it. I'm not going to hold you accountable, not me, but it's just a suggestion on your part to enrich your own practice. Just to live in a way that it's gratitude, or in the words of Brother David Steinelrast with his Austrian accent, gratefulness. To live a life of gratefulness is the best way we humans can live our life. Why? If we are able to open our eyes to the blessings and bounties and gifts that the world, that the universe continues to shower upon us, we can only be grateful for that. And we can only live our lives from that point on as a way of repaying that gratitude in loving service to all, in the concrete ways that each one of us is given, with our talents and our gifts, with also our limitations and so on, with our financial and social and cultural, linguistic and other capabilities, to live my life no longer for my own little self-ambition, for my own comfort and for my own security, but now to totally live according to that movement that called me out of nothingness into a life showered with so much love. And now I simply give back my life in return for that love, to love others in the best way I can. Some may ask, to whom are we being grateful? Those of us who come from the Abrahamic traditions already are familiar with a term that is central to those traditions. Jewish, Christian, and Muslim faith traditions have a term that is central to our faith, namely the term God, or Allah, or Adonai, Elohim. That which humans use as a name to point to the holy that we experience in our lives. Now that sometimes gets to be identified in a certain concept, and if we have an idea of that, like a grand old man up in the sky with a white beard looking down on us and so on, then that's when we get into trouble. We put all sorts of human, or what they call anthropomorphic imagery, and then we set up a dualistic way of looking at ourselves and that which we refer to with that term God or Allah or Adonai. But I'd like to take the hint of another Zen master, Norman Fisher, who was also abbot of San Francisco Zen Center, who gives us a hint as to how we can take that term God or Adonai or Allah used in the Abrahamic traditions, not in that anthropomorphic way as somebody out there separate from us, but as precisely a pointer to a mystery that is deep within us and yet is beyond our grasp. As many of you may know, Norman Fisher Roshi is also a poet. And so he also comes from the Jewish tradition. And it is his Zen practice that also enabled him to reconnect with his Jewish tradition. And so one of his works is a translation of the Psalms, a very powerful set of poetic expressions to the divine from the ancient Jewish tradition. And he entitles his translation, in which he selects most of the he selects psalms that are truly more significant and meaningful for him, in a book that he entitles Opening to You. So here he addresses the Adonai, that which is called God in the Abrahamic traditions, as you. So what does he mean by that? He gives us a hint in his introductory remarks. He says, for some years, I've been giving thought to the question of who the audience of my poetry actually was. I came to see that I was not writing for ordinary persons, not for colleagues, not for poetry lovers. The person to whom my poems actually seemed to be addressed was someone much more silent and much more profoundly receptive than any human being could possibly be. This person wasn't a person at all. It was nobody, nothing, and it wasn't anywhere at any time. It was even beyond meaning. So poetry is important to me, not because it gives me a chance to express myself or to communicate, but because, and here are the words I'd like to mark, it's an encounter with that which is both close to me that I can't see it, and so far away I can never reach it. Poetry evokes the unknowable. So in short, if we are really able to fathom the depths of our Zen experience, what is waiting for us is an encounter with the unknowable. We may give names to that: Buddha nature, true self, emptiness, whatever names, or in the Abrahamic traditions, God, Allah, Adonai. It's not that they're all the same, but they are different names from the different religious and cultural traditions, trying to name that holy, which is truly unknowable. So to admit that it is unknowable is the first point that we need to really claim, so that we can have a more experiential gateway to that reality that the Abrahamic traditions are talking about, and not think that it's out there and it can be defined like this, the super almighty who can do all of this and so forth. But to set those ideas aside and to really come to the depths of our being and realize that something is inviting us there to go further and further deeper, and know that it's beyond anything we can ever reach and we can ever attain, and yet somehow it draws us more and more. And that is what I would like to identify with the word love with a capital L that I talk about in my different ways of expressing what Zen is for me and what it can be for all of us. When I say that Zen is finding love everywhere, in all things, I am referring to that deep dimension that calls us further and further deeper and more deeply, and and it does not isolate us into little silos where I'm with my little inner world. But as you know, rather than isolating us as silos, our Zen practice enables us to reach that place and go deeper and realize that what is waiting for us there is our sense of interconnectedness with one another, that we are intimately, deeply connected and deeply indebted to one another as kin, so that we can really have a truly experiential sense of the kinship of everyone and everything around us. What Yogen Steve Stuckey was referring to when he noted that he looks at the wide earth around him, the mountains and the rivers and the stars and the ground and the grass, and realizes that they are his own body, and that the sky is as much as part of him as his eyelashes, or that the tree is as much a part of him as his shoulder. So that's the invitation that our practice invites us to. And when we are able to have a glimpse of that, somehow our world is transformed. And somehow we are able to see through these delusions of this little ego, and somehow we are enabled to really live a life no longer centered on this little self. One of our Sangha members gave a short presentation of what Zen practice meant to her last week, and she mentioned 3 points. This is Kathleen Cole, and I am grateful to her for giving me this threefold hint as to what Zen practice can mean to us. First, she said, it gives me a sense of groundedness. That groundedness where I know I am at home and I am at peace and I am no longer perturbed by things around me. I'm no longer trying to search for my place in the world, because I know I'm at home, I'm grounded. And that's what Zen can offer to us. That groundedness in that affirmation of that unconditional love is what can happen as we go deeper in our Zen practice. And then the next point is a non-dual awareness. Again, it's a very technical term. Kathleen used that to refer to precisely that sense of kinship with each and everything and each and everyone, where there is nothing separate from me. That word non-duality is a philosophical term that says there's nothing separate. We're all interconnected. So we may hear that word and easily mouth it, but the invitation that this practice invites us to is taste and see that non-dual awareness. And thirdly, the most natural outflow of that groundedness and non-dual awareness is a life of compassion that also is able to bear the sufferings of all who suffer as my own suffering. So those 3 points, which I thank Kathleen Cole for articulating, also correspond to the 3 fruits of Zen that we've talked about in a different way. As centering, finding oneself as centered in everything one does and everything one and everywhere one is. A sense of opening one's eyes to the reality of one's true self, that is that non-dual awareness, and letting that be embodied in my day-to-day life, the personalization of that awakening to non-dual awareness, which is translated as compassion. In short, love with a capital L. If only more and more of us could live in this way, we could be agents of transforming the world. So I invite each and every one of you to share this message, not so much by preaching or telling people, hey, you do Zen also because it's good for you, not to be a preachy Zen proselytizer, but to let that love shine forth in your lives so that when people see you and ask you, how did you come to be such a person? Then you can say, well, my Zen practice has helped me. So like what Michael Camp Schaefer said yesterday, if Zen is finding love, finding infinite and unconditional love everywhere and at all times, he said, that's what I want. Reminds me of the film Sleepless in Seattle, where there was a lady at a table and there was a neighboring table where someone seems to have had some very, very exciting experience. And so she said, that's what I want. So in any case, if we can be a person where we, in our relations with other people around us, when they meet us, when they talk to us, somehow it doesn't come out in the way we try to convince them, but somehow in the very way we relate to them, in the very way we hold them in our hearts, they say, I'd like to be like that also. And that's what the Buddha was also to the people around him. And that's why they said, please, sir, teach us how to awaken like you. So let us then follow that direction. And this Zen practice has given us the way to find love at all times, everywhere. Let us continue in our silence so that that can be a reality with every breath, in every moment of our lives.